And we are back for prepping for winter with Victarion sample chapter. Victarion is preparing for his attack on Meereen and has packed a civilian ship full of soldiers under the command of Wolf One-Ear for a surprise attack that is very similar to Tyrion's plan at the Blackwater and perhaps Euron's plan in the Redwine Straits. As Victarion stands at the prow of a ship watching Wolf One-Ear sail off, he eagerly awaits the glory and horror of battle while thinking sadly of the past, appearing as one of Dany's visions in the House of the Undying. And now let's continue. Captain, the voice belonged to Longwater Pike, the oarsmen await your pleasure. 3 of them, and strong ones.
Send them into my cabin. I'll want the priest as well.
The oarsmen were all big, one a boy, one a brute, one a bastard's bastard. The boy had been rowing for less than a year, the brute for 20. They had names, but Victarion did not know them. One had come from Lamentation, one from Sparrowhawk, one from Spider Kiss. He could not be expected to know the names of every thrall who ever pulled an oar in the Iron Fleet. So Victarion has a handful of faithful crewmen mentioned in A Dance with Dragons, and Longwater Pike is among them, being mentioned the second most after Wolf One-Ear. And it's Pike that tells Victarion that 3 oarsmen have arrived. We have no real history on Longwater Pike, who only first appears in A Dance with Dragons. The character is obviously a bastard and seems pretty loyal to Victarion, but that's about it. We have no idea if he has any relations to House Longwaters, which would seem like a long shot. So the 3 thralls that are presented to Victarion are a boy, a brute, and a bastard's bastard, and we are given very little information on who these men are, not even their names. And Victarion seems to think that it's perfectly fine that he doesn't know these men's names, which of course makes me suspicious. Corran Halfhand clearly tells Jon to lead men you must know them, and we hear of characters like Ned eating with his men and doing just that. When Jon, for example, stops socializing and knowing his men, he gets assassinated. Even Euron knew the name of his hornblower, while Victarion does not. It's fairly clear that knowing your men is important, which Victarion is not doing, so perhaps we should examine these 3 men more closely. So Victarion clearly asked for 3 strong men, which the boy, the brute, and the bastard's bastard are. But from a captain's perspective, this is a loss, so one would likely want to give over your worst possible oarsman to fit this request. For example, a boy with only a year rowing experience would not be a big loss, and thus I find it rather odd that the brute, an oarsman with 20 years of experience, is given over. Why give over a strong, loyal, experienced man? He seems far too valuable to give up or to be sacrificed when others are available. Our author has also given some seemingly extraneous information on the ships that they have come from: Lamentation, Sparrowhawk, and Spider Kiss. This is the first mention of Spider Kiss, and all we know of Sparrowhawk is that it's one of the swiftest ships. Lamentation, though, is a suspicious ship, as Lamentation's captain is bloodless Tom Codd. Let's keep in mind that Victarion left the Codds behind to get slaughtered at Moat Cailin, and both Lucas and Eldred Codd are Euron supporters. Victarion clearly has no respect for the Codds, and the Codds should have no love for Victarion. In fact, if there's one man in Victarion's fleet not to trust, it's Tom Codd. Though I also don't trust Quell Humble, but that's neither here nor there. The point being, one of these 3 men, either the boy, the brute, or the bastard's bastard, was gifted by the untrustworthy, bloodless Tom Codd. What's also odd is that Tom Codd seems to be one of the chief lieutenant captains in the fleet underneath Victarion. When Victarion speaks of needing to communicate a message to the entire fleet, he speaks of needing to talk to the Vole, the Black Shepherd, Ralph the Limper, and Bloodless Tom. So Bloodless Tom seems to have some sort of position of power or authority, and yet gave a man from his own ship.
"Show them the horn,"
he commanded when the 3 had been ushered into his cabin. Moqorro brought it forth, and the dusky woman lifted up a lantern to give them all a look. In the shifting lantern light, the hell horn seemed to writhe and turn in the priest's hands like a serpent fighting to escape. Moqorro was a man of monstrous size, big-bellied, broad-shouldered, towering, but even in his grasp, the horn looked huge.
"My brother found this thing on Valyria,"
Victarion told the thralls.
"Think how big the dragon must have been to bear 2 of these upon his head. Bigger than Vhagar or Meraxes. Bigger than Balerion the Black Dread."
And so here we have Moqorro bringing in the dragon horn, and we get a brief description of Moqorro again. Now there is some debate on whether or not Moqorro is glamoured and that he is secretly someone else in our story, like perhaps Marwyn. It's certainly tough to say, but there are some minor physical descriptions that might point to something. Moqorro's tattoos are described as yellow and orange by Tyrion, but then they're described as red and orange by Victarion. Additionally, although he's described as pitch black in color by Tyrion, Victarion describes Mokoro's skin as being blacker still. He's inhumanly black, and here in this scene he's described as towering. However, he's described as being the same height as Victarion in the Iron Suitor chapter. Not that Victarion isn't tall, but would a tall person call another tall person towering? Maybe. Again, who knows, these discrepancies are pretty minor. So here we also get a brief description of the dragon horn's sinister look and size. Back in the Drowned Man chapter, Aeron describes the horn as black, twisted, gold-banded with Valyrian runes, and taller than a man. So we're talking about a horn that's at least 7 feet tall or over 2 meters in length. It's worth noting that Mance Rayder's horn was also black, twisted, gold-banded with runes, though First Men runes, and 8 feet long. So taller than a man. If not actual mates, these two horns are clearly metaphorically paired. Now Victarion makes a big deal about the size of the horn, mentioning that the horn must have been attached to a dragon larger than Balerion. Now this is a bit interesting, as the dragons we knew of in Westeros became progressively smaller with each subsequent generation. This may point to the idea that Balerion himself was smaller than his predecessors as well, that the shrinking of dragons predated Aegon's Landing. Now regarding the size of the horn, it's notable that Victarion fixates on this, as if the size of something is automatically linked to the amount of power it has. Let's remember that Sam Tarly's small horn from the Fist of the First Men may be the true Horn of Winter. And this all gets back to Victarion's hang-ups and the phallic imagery of the horn. Victarion is massively insecure, fearing he isn't manly enough and that he has a small penis. This has all led to his over-the-top macho personality where he tries to compensate for his inferiority complex. And so it's no wonder that Victarion sees a big horn and assumes power. He took the horn from Mokoro and ran his palm along its curves.
At the Kingsmoot on Old Wick, one of Euron's mutes blew this horn. Some of you will remember. It's not a sound that any man who heard it will ever forget.
They say he died, the boy said. Him who blew the horn.
Aye, the horn was smoking after. The mute had blisters on his lips, and the bird inked across his chest was bleeding. He died the next day. When they cut him open, his lungs were black.
So here Victarion rubs his massive horn with his palm. Yes, this is more phallic imagery, but this rubbing is actually what Mance does with his horn when Jon meets him north of the Wall in A Storm of Swords. Now with that horn, we never actually had any confirmation that the thing had power. In the end, it didn't really matter. It was the story of the horn that Mance used to bind the wildlings together. Power resides where men think it resides. And although I have argued in the past that this isn't a dragon horn but a horn that mentally persuades people, I do also wonder if this dragon horn has any magical power at all. After all, at the Kingsmoot, Euron did bribe everyone and make a really good speech and convince everyone that he had a magical horn. That may have been adequate to win the Kingsmoot. And so it is striking that Victarion here is trying to convince the boy, the brute, and the bastard's bastard, and perhaps himself, of the horn's power. He notes the horn's creepy sound and its size and fakes the connection to the power of Balerion the dragon. But what evidence do we really have that the horn is powerful? The sound and size are, after all, meaningless. We essentially just have the tale of Craigorn, the hornblower. Victarion tells us that Craigorn had blisters on his lips, and the bird across his chest was bleeding, and his lungs were charred. Now, we have no idea if Craigorn got blisters from the horn. Everyone first sees him while blowing the horn. He could have had blisters from before that due to sunburn or cold sores. Additionally, the tattoo on his chest already depicted a bird with bloody talons, so I question whether the bird was actually bleeding. And finally, the black lung story was told to Victarion by Euron. He never actually saw it. The most magic we actually see are some glowing runes and some smoke. Some simple pyrotechnic effects. In fact, this is the only magical effect we saw from Mance's horn as well. When Melisandre threw it into a fire, it went up in a whoosh of flame. However, we know that she adds secret powders to flames to trick people. And so at the end of the day, we should absolutely be skeptical on whether or not this horn has any power. And even if all of the tales related to Craigorn were true, there are other real-world things that can cause a man to blister, bleed, and get black lung. Radioactive material being one of them.
"The horn is cursed," said the bastard's bastard. "A dragon horn from Valyria," said Victarion. "Aye, it's cursed. I never said it wasn't."
He brushed his hand across one of the red-gold bands, and the ancient glyph seemed to sing beneath his fingertips. For half a heartbeat, he wanted nothing so much as to sound the horn himself. Euron was a fool to give me this. It is a precious thing, and powerful. With this, I'll win the Seastone chair, And then the Iron Throne. With this, I'll win the world.
Clegorn blew this horn thrice and died for it. He was as big as any of you, and strong as me. So strong that he could twist a man's head right off his shoulders with only his bare hands. And yet the horn killed him.
So here we see Victarion almost seduced by the dragon horn, and we get a pretty big homage to Lord of the Rings, with Victarion wanting to blow the horn himself. This is just as in Lord of the Rings, with people around the Ring of Power being tempted to wear it. Victarion even refers to the horn as precious. Now in Lord of the Rings, the Ring of Power is titularly, literally, and metaphorically a symbol of power. And with absolute power corrupting absolutely, the One Ring twists anyone who possesses it. And here we see how just the thought of power corrupts Victarion. He doesn't just want the sea stone chair now, he wants the Iron Throne and the world. In fact, Victarion has surpassed the goals of Euron himself, and has set his sights on world domination. A goal we've only perhaps heard about once before with the stallion who mounts the world. Of course, we are told that power is something very different in the world of Ice and Fire. Unlike in Lord of the Rings, where power is simply power, in Ice and Fire we are told power is based on belief and illusion. And we should remember that George R.R. Martin loves to subvert the tropes of Tolkien. And thus, we should again be very skeptical of this dragon horn. The more and more Victarion tells us of the horn's power, the more we should question it. And Victarion does tell us more tales about the horn's power. He claims it's from Valyria. But again, we have no proof of this. Sure, Euron claims he went to Valyria and that the horn is from Valyria, but is he really a trustworthy source? Victarion has simply accepted these tales and have passed them on. But even if the horn were from Valyria, we still have no proof of its power. Now it's of note that Victarion tells tales of Cregorn the Hornblower, but we should remember that in the Reaver chapter, Victarion had no idea who he was. Euron had to tell him. In fact, here Victarion clearly speaks his name incorrectly and calls him Clegorn. I've heard George R. R. Martin read this chapter. He clearly reads Clegorn, the incorrect name. Again, Victarion cannot be bothered to know the name of thralls. And so the details about Cregorn that Victarion adds are rather interesting. As strong as Victarion, it is claimed, able to twist off a man's head. We know none of this to be true. Cregorn blows a horn, collapses, and then is never seen again. We have no idea if he was strong as Victarion and able to twist a man's head off. And neither would Victarion. Victarion didn't know who this man was, and now can't even keep the man's name straight. He's clearly making up information. I can only guess that he's doing this to make the horn seem powerful enough to kill a strong man. And so it seems that Victarion is talking up the danger and power of blowing the horn. He passes on unproven stories that Euron told him about the horn being from Valyria and it killing Cregorn, and then Victarion adds to the story by saying the horn is cursed, that it was part of a dragon larger than Balerion, and that Cregorn was more powerful than he likely was. Now I can't actually see the point in talking up the horn for the benefit of thralls, since they would be forced to blow the horn anyway. Their opinion is actually quite irrelevant. I suppose Victarion is talking up the horn for his own benefit, for his own delusion. After all, he needs to believe that the horn is power to compensate for his feelings of inferiority. Now Victarion does say something quite notable about Euron, that he was a fool to give up the horn. But we know Euron to not be a fool, we know him to be calculating. So why would Euron give Victarion the horn? Why give up something so precious? This is a riddle that many have wrestled with, and prior to the Forsaken chapter's release, some argued that Euron was actually secretly nearby and never gave up the horn. That Euron's entire plan was to get Victarion to blow the horn for him, the theory went. But now we know that Euron is off in the Redwyne Straits. And so some pose that Euron's faithful minions are close by to retake the horn, or that Euron doesn't need to be close by to claim a dragon. Still, none of these theories really sit well. If Euron was in the East and had a horn that could bind dragons, why didn't he just claim a dragon himself then and there? Why go home and try to win the Kingsmoot with the mere promise of a dragon, and then give the horn to his brother that hates him? That's a really bad plan, especially compared to just claiming a dragon and being powerful. It does seem that Euron was unable to bind a dragon to his will with the horn, so either Euron couldn't get the horn to work, or the horn didn't really have any power to begin with. And this is a good place to stop. We will conclude the Victarion sample chapter in part 3. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.